And Rogues, issue number 1, is written by Joshua Williamson with art by Leo Max, colors by Matthias Lopez, and letters by Hassan Otsmane Alejo. And this issue begins at a bar of supervillains, with Sam Simeon telling the Condiment King about his woes, when a villain mistakes Sam for Gorilla Grodd, at which point Sam goes on to tell of how Gorilla City has a vault filled with countless amounts of gold, of which Captain Cold overhears. The one talking to Sam then brings up Angel, Sam's old partner, and asks if she is now with Detective Chimp. Sam becomes enraged and attacks, causing an all-out villain brawl. We then see Captain Cold sitting with the Rogues as the perspective zooms in closer and closer until we are completely zoomed in on his eyes. The book then cuts to 10 years later, and Captain Cold is asleep until awoken by his parole officer who stopped by for a surprise inspection. Snart complies while getting ready for work, eventually leading to him taking a bus into Central City and to his factory job. It isn't long after his arrival that he's summoned to his boss's office, where he actually receives a promotion. However, after leaving, Snart overhears his employers making fun of him behind his back, which Snart then goes home in anger and proceeds to tear everything apart before taking out a series of various components. We then shift focus to Snart's sister, Lisa, aka Golden Glider, who works as a caseworker. It's after taking a family to a shelter that Snart appears, and at first Lisa wants nothing to do with her brother, but eventually she agrees to hear him out. We then come to meet our next rogue, James Jesse, aka the Trickster, who is a successful illusionist. So when Snart comes to him, the conversation is brief, and Jesse declines the offer. Next up on Snart's list is Benjamin Turner, aka Bronze Tiger, who teaches self-defense in the park, and although is happy to see Lisa, he does not share the same affection towards Snart. However, after listening a bit more, he comes around, and it's then we shift over to a drugstore where Frankie Kane, aka Magenta, is trying to get her pills that help control her powers, but they're unfortunately too expensive, and just when she's about to lose control, Lisa shows up and pays for her pills. Frankie assumes that Lisa isn't there out of the kindness of her heart, and here's what Lisa has to say. While this goes on, Snart is attempting to recruit his longtime partner Mick Rory, aka Heatwave. Of course, Mick doesn't need much convincing and agrees almost immediately. Sometime later, we come to the meeting place of the Rogues, where James Jesse has had a change of heart and enters, and it's there Snart lays out his big plan, recalling what he had heard from Sam Simeon years earlier, and his plan is to break into Gorilla City, find the vault, and steal the gold. Naturally, everyone is displeased with this, thinking it's suicide, but Snart brings up his ace in the hole, which is Evan McCullough, aka Mirror Master. But unfortunately, he's locked up in a rehab facility, and everyone breaks in except for Mick, who is the getaway driver, with Frankie having taken out the cameras. They eventually find Evan, but he's all drugged up, and it's then that, because of the emergency generator, the camera is kicked back on and the alarm starts sounding. The Rogues attempt their escape but become surrounded by several heavily armed guards. Snart, unable to take any more, whips out his cold gun and freezes all of the guards before kicking them to pieces. Snart takes this opportunity then to remind everyone who they really are, and that is the Rogues. And I will say that I did have to sit on this book just a little bit, and actually had to give it a couple extra read-throughs because I found I had some mixed feelings on it. Because the premise here is not a wholly original one. I mean, it's a very standard group of has-beens, years down the line, getting back together for that, one last hurrah kind of thing. With this particular one being about the Rogues planning a heist. It's a heist story, and in that aspect, I did find the book to be fairly predictable and paint by numbers. So I was able to guess most of what was going to happen way before it happened. Like, for example, when Snart is called into his boss's office, he gets the promotion, I'm just sitting there thinking to myself, oh, well, that's nice. They're probably going to make fun of him right after he walks out. And in the back of my mind, I'm sort of saying it to myself, like, oh, that's a joke, but then it actually transpires on the page. And there continue to be several instances of this throughout the story. But I will say, despite this fact right here, I think the Rogues are characterized fairly well, and I can kind of sympathize with him to a degree. My favorite part of this issue is in fact the opening sequence. I thought it was really cool to get a look at the supervillain bar. We see like all of these different supervillains and whatnot. Shout out to the Condiment King, by the way. The greatest Batman villain of all time. But yeah, it was a really fun opening sequence that did set the stage for what Captain Cold was going to eventually plan. Oh, and it's also during the sequence that we find out that the Riddler actually hooked up with Cheetah. Is he attracted to her personality, or is the Riddler just a furry? You be the judge. One thing that did catch me, however, was how the rogues, not so much the rogues like individually, but kind of being a rogue in general, was almost characterized like an addiction. I mean, you have this group of reformed supervillains that are trying their best to keep themselves on the straight and narrow, but circumstances kind of like, you know, pull them back into a life of villainy. Except for James Jesse, who's actually a pretty successful illusionist. Among all of the other rogues, he's got the most to lose. Yet for some inexplicable reason, he decides that, okay, yeah, I'm going to join the rogues. And the only thing that makes sense to me of why he would do that is that he's looking to feel that rush again, which I do think is even solidified by the fact that the rogues actually have to break into a rehab facility in order to get Mirror Master out. A guy who's in rehab to try and get himself better, but then here comes his old crew thrusting him back into the life he was trying to recover from. And in that, it does make the story feel a lot more personal. Now, when it comes to the art, it's got this sort of like, you know, gritty style to it. It uses a lot of solid colors in its panels and whatnot, specifically to highlight certain things. Like, for example, when we're introduced to Lisa and she's, you know, kind of got a yellowish hue to all of her panels until her brother comes in and suddenly we're interjecting some blue. And then at first she's sort of like telling him, hey, go away. And we kind of see them like, you know, side by side, and we got, you know, him blue, her yellow. But then as he starts to talk, the panels become more blue until she decides to listen to him, in which case blue just takes over the whole panel, which I think this personally symbolizes her being pulled back into his world. But I will say one thing, the artist was definitely not kind to Leonard Snart, because while all of the other rogues get to remain, you know, fairly young looking, and, you know, they even point out that they are in their 40s, Leonard Snart's just looks grandpa looking. I mean, sure, they have him doing stuff that, you know, some of the younger cats would do, like, you know, kicking cops apart after they've been frozen into blocks of ice. But I will say, sometimes I'm thinking about it in my mind, I'm going to the Gorilla City, and then I'm worried that this dude's gonna break a hip. So at the end of it, I did end up enjoying it more after a few extra read-throughs, and I can say that I think the story definitely has potential, but it's not gonna be everybody's cup of tea. And with that, I'm going to give Rogues issue number 1 a 7 out of 10. So Rogues issue number 1. What did you think about this book? If you've read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. And if you like this video, I'd love it if you'd smash that like button, share it with some friends, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and ring that notification bell for more comic book content. And if you're wondering what to watch next, consider one of these 2 videos. Alright, take care, have a great day, and as always, stay geeky.